Welcome to the inaugural Listen Carefully Legislative Report. I'm Blaise Delfino, Director of Professional Relations at Starkey, and I'm here with our Executive Vice President of Corporate Relations, Michael Scholl. Michael, it's great to have you on the show.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Michael, for the past 5+ years, you and the team here at Starkey have been working on an exciting project called Listen Carefully. Can you bring us through Listen Carefully's mission and the goals of Listen Carefully and really what it is?
Sure. Well, Listen Carefully has been a great opportunity to develop a program to help educate individuals with hearing loss, policymakers, legislators, and hearing professionals about policy changes that's impacting our industry. If we go back to 2016, 2017, there was a lot of discussion in Washington related to over-the-counter hearing aids. And Starkey really led the effort to ensure that elected officials, policymakers understand the impact of creating this new category. One of the tools that we developed and utilized to help educate hearing professionals, help educate policymakers and their staff was Listen Carefully. So it's that one-stop interactive shop where individuals can come and find out what legislative, what policy initiatives are happening across the country at the federal level, at the state level, and even the local level that impacts the work that we do in the hearing industry.
Absolutely. And Michael, how does Listen Carefully engage in federal and state advocacy efforts around important issues such as over-the-counter hearing aids, Medicare coverage, and hearing protection?
Yeah. You know, currently in the United States, there are over 140 pieces of state legislation that have something to do with our industry, right? You may think, well, that's not a lot. That's a lot of legislation.
It's a lot.
And it's coming from different legislative bodies. It's coming from different commissions. So we really are at the forefront and leading on making sure we know what's in these legislative initiatives, this legislation that's been brought forward. As I mentioned, we really kicked off Listen Carefully with OTC at the federal level, but quite often, whether it is coverage of hearing aids, whether it has to do with professional licensing of hearing aids, both the federal and the state government, they have a lot of impact on how we do business, right? Our space is highly regulated. And for hearing professionals, you are committed to operating and running your clinic or clinics on a daily basis. And you're seeing patients every 30 minutes, every 60 minutes. And you don't have the time to run a business and also stay up to speed on what your local senator or congressperson or legislator is doing. So what we've really tried to do is we've tried to boil all of the information, bring all of the information to Listen Carefully, so you can then look at the federal level, you can look at the state level, state by state, to see what's happening that's impacting your business, your industry. And maybe there's no impact, or maybe it's not an issue that you think really impacts you. That's fine, but at least we have a one-stop repository where you can find out what are policymakers doing on a daily basis that impacts the thousands of people, the thousands of hearing professionals, but the millions and millions of individuals across the country who have hearing loss.
And Michael, if I can share a story,
Sure.
This is very personal to me. As a former private practice owner, let's rewind to 2020.
Sure.
COVID-19 pandemic, and being a former private practice owner, family-owned practice, we were shut down for a couple of months. And I remember being connected with Michael Scholl. Of course, Listen Carefully was already an entity that was spreading awareness of hearing healthcare. And Michael spent about 30 minutes on the phone with me. And Michael, the question was, how can we expedite the opening of our practice? Because Pennsylvania was one of the last states to open up. And the question is, how can hearing care professionals today educate policymakers? And the big takeaway there, Michael, was you said, Blaise, educate your state and federal elected officials. And a couple weeks later, we had Senator Mario Scavello come to the office. We gave him a tour of the office. And then a couple of months later, he invited us onto his legislative report. And So I want to thank you, because you not only are helping hundreds and even thousands of hearing care professionals, but you helped me as well. And that's why I love working on this project with you.
You make a really good point. Your issue at that moment had to do with COVID, right? And the executive order that the leader of Pennsylvania issued. I start out, if I'm talking to a group or a class about Listen Carefully and what Listen Carefully does on behalf of professionals across the country, one of the first questions I ask is, raise your hand if you think the government impacts the business that you do. And not everybody raises their hand, but you never know when something is going to impact your business. COVID, we didn't know what was going to happen, right? We were monitoring all 50 states. There were 1,200 plus executive orders, and in most states, hearing professionals were allowed to remain open. Pennsylvania was the one exception where even hearing professionals, clinics, fell into a category that had to close during COVID. But through Listen Carefully, through our Listen Carefully network, through classes, through seminars that we were doing, we were constantly working to update professionals on what state executive orders were impacting them as it related to COVID, right? That's one microcosm of how government impacts the businesses that hearing professionals are in, that's outside of, policy making, outside of insurance coverage, outside of licensing. You never know when there might be something from the government, from regulators that impact our business. So, we were happy, I was happy to have that conversation with you. You got an elected official into your office right away, and you were there to educate them, right?
Yes.
Elected officials, right, they've got a varying degrees of backgrounds. They're not hearing professionals, right? They don't know about our space. They don't know about the importance of a hearing professional and the process that it goes through to get somebody with hearing loss into the right hearing devices for them to ensure long-term health. And the only other thing, I also share a statistic that I think is really important. There was a study, actually it was a thesis out of Indiana, a doctoral thesis about advocacy and hearing professionals. And hearing professionals were asked, do you want to be more involved in with your policymakers and what they're doing? Do you want to lobby more? Do you want to advocate more? And it was 90+% that said absolutely, but they said they don't know how, right? They don't have time. So Listen Carefully is, again, a mechanism, a tool to make it easier for busy hearing professionals to understand how to advocate, how to lobby, how to educate policymakers.
Absolutely. And Michael, thank you and your leadership and Brandon's leadership for establishing an incredibly important tool for our hearing care professionals. Of course, speaking from that experience, that's where this excitement absolutely comes from. Now, when you talk about bridging the gap between hearing care professionals and the elected officials, we started what was called our Listen Carefully Ambassador Program, and this program has just grown. We have a brand new website, listencarefully.org, that is going to highlight our ambassadors. What inspired the establishment of this program? What does the Ambassador Program mean to Listen Carefully, and what is the why behind that program? Three-pronged question, Michael.
it's a really important question. The Listen Carefully Ambassador Program is a key to the entire Listen Carefully program. It's one thing for, the giant hearing aid manufacturer to come to the table, to reach out to a policymaker, to reach out to an elected official and say, we're coming on behalf of the industry or on behalf of hearing professionals or behalf of individuals with hearing loss. That's great. They will listen. We will get a seat at the table. But having Listen Carefully ambassadors who have a presence in a state or a local community is very important if something is happening in that state or in that congressional district, because they're a constituent, right? Because they're a member of the community and they know firsthand what's happening in that local community or what's happening in that state, or they may know their congressperson or their senator, right? So Starkey has a very strong influence and relationships with lots of folks, but at the end of the day, they want to hear from local constituents. And that's why it's so important to have Listen Carefully ambassadors who can speak on behalf of the industry, can speak on behalf of hearing professionals, but they're also a constituent, right? They're also a resident of that elected official. So we developed the ambassador program as a program to utilize when we have something happening in a particular state. So let's pick a state, right? Let's pick Pennsylvania. If something was happening in Pennsylvania, we have a couple of ambassadors that we can go to and we can say, look, we really need you to get engaged because you're a constituent of this elected official.
Yes.
You're a resident of Pennsylvania. And yes, they may care about what Starkey says, but at the end of the day, they're going to care a lot more about what you, their constituent, has to say and has to believe on this issue. So we're in the process, and we continue to grow each day by adding more ambassadors in every state. So it's a partnership. If something needs to be addressed, good or bad, it's a partnership between Starkey, the manufacturer, and the professionals. And the two working together, it's a really powerful combination.
And this absolutely is a partnership. And the question that we might get, Michael, is I am a private practice owner. I am incredibly busy. My staff is busy. In what ways do Listen Carefully ambassadors collaborate with policymakers to really promote better hearing health options for individuals with hearing loss?
Fortunately, there's not a lot happening where we need a lot of engagement from Listen Carefully ambassadors, right? When things start to, when we need more engagement, that means there's more legislation where they're supporting or so things are relatively quiet. But we do have quarterly meetings, right, to keep our ambassadors up to speed on what's happened in other states. Quite often we'll have ambassadors maybe submit commentary or letters on a certain topic, right, to their elected officials. But the other really cool, unique opportunity being a Listen Carefully ambassador is what you got to experience in Pennsylvania, but it's the opportunity to host an elected official, to help educate them so they better understand what's happening in your clinic, in your practice. So I think it's really exciting, for Listen Carefully ambassadors to have that opportunity to have, maybe it's their state legislator, their state senator, maybe it's their member of Congress, to come through their office, to see patients, the process that they go through, maybe to have their ears cleaned out, have a hearing test. It's to build that relationship, because at the end of the day, we're building these relationships, we're educating policymakers, not because we have an ask, but we want to be their go-to, right? We want to be the source of truth about what's happening in our space when it comes to hearing healthcare. And you have to have a relationship, and your elected official has to know who you are, and you have to know who they are in order to have that relationship to better educate them on the important topics that we're facing.
And Michael, Listen Carefully, we focus on advocacy, education, and news. And as we had discussed a little bit earlier in this segment, we have a brand new website, listencarefully.org. Now, Michael, what's really exciting about this new website that we introduced, how can hearing care professionals educate policymakers? And we now have an integrated tool through our voter voice. Now, this was an extension that I think our whole team was really excited about, because that really bridges the gap between our hearing care professionals and policymakers. What was the vision, Michael, behind that tool that you had? What are you most excited about that tool? And I think we've used it a couple of months ago.
It's the direct connection. Quite often when talking to a group or talking to an individual, the question that I'll get is, well, who are my elected officials, right? How do I contact them? Do I call? Do I have an email? Now on the website, through the voter voice functionality that we have, hearing professionals, individuals with hearing loss, anybody, right, can utilize this tool. You include your address, and it gives you a list of all of your elected officials, from the president, your statewide elected officials, governor, other statewide officers, your state representative, state senator, your member of Congress, your United States senators. So you now have a tool and functionality that you can call and email them within the voter voice tool. And I can't stress how important it is. These calls, these emails really do matter.
Yes.
These offices have staff members who are looking at the correspondence that they get from their constituents. And one call, okay, yep, we'll take note of it. Two, boy, this really means something. You start getting 3 or 4 emails and calls on a particular issue, it rockets up.
That happened in New Jersey.
It happened in New Jersey, right, as it relates to licensing, right? We got our ambassadors engaged, we got policymakers, we got professionals engaged, right? And folks took notice. So to think that your one email or your one phone call or your one correspondence doesn't matter, I'm here to tell you firsthand that it's really important. And now there is a tool that makes it easier because we know it takes time, and it's more turnkey to stay in touch with your elected officials. I would encourage everyone to use the tool at listencarefully.org and just introduce yourself, right?
Yes.
Take it and introduce yourself. Hello, I'm a hearing professional. Here's where my office is. This is what I would do. Happy to answer any questions, happy to host you at any time. There's no downside in making that outreach because elected officials, they want to be involved in their community and they want more opportunities to get engaged. So use the tool on listencarefully.org as an introductory tool, even if there are no important policy issues currently happening.
And Michael, you mentioned community. Hearing healthcare is community-based. So 4 years ago, when we had that phone call during COVID and reaching out to Senator Scavello to invite him to our office, that was really to educate him and his colleagues on the importance of hearing healthcare, and that just so happened to turn into an invite to his legislative report. So as hearing healthcare professionals, we really do have a duty to raise awareness of hearing healthcare within our community amongst all of our community members.
If hearing healthcare professionals are not doing it, then who is, right? Nobody is educating elected officials. They're constantly being bombarded by other interest groups, by constituents, which is great. But if nobody's talking about hearing healthcare, they're not learning, they're not understanding the topic better. It's so important that hearing healthcare professionals spend time doing that.
Michael, when we visit listencarefully.org, you'll see a map of the United States. And what's phenomenal about this tool is when you click one of the states, it has current consumer action. So you had mentioned 140 plus pieces of legislation. We are keeping our page up to date with all of that information as well. And going briefly back to the OTC conversation, a lot of hearing care professionals, I mean, myself included, from 2017 to 2023, it was like, is the sky really falling? But we understand and we know and we believe that our technology in the hands of the hearing care professional has the best outcomes. And we just have to thank you and Brandon and the rest of the team for really taking that step forward and leading the industry and educating our policymakers during that time.
Yeah, Starkey, proud to be part of the team, under Brandon's, guidance and leadership. Starkey did lead throughout the entire discussion related to OTC hearing aids, and we're leading post that discussion as it relates to policy and other advocacy issues, right? Listen Carefully is the only type of organization, we're the only manufacturer that's leading on this issue. And as I laid out earlier, government policymakers, they are passing legislation, introducing rules that impact our industry on a daily basis. So I think it's really important, and we're proud of the work that we do to help keep hearing professionals up to date on what's happening.
Michael, what does the vision for Listen Carefully look like? What are you most excited about?
Well, I'm really excited about the voter voice tool that we talked about earlier, right? It takes the barrier of contacting your elected official, it lessens that barrier, right? It's a lot easier, the hurdle's much lower. So people should be utilizing that tool on a frequent basis just to stay in front of their policymakers and their elected officials. So I'm really excited about that. But I'm really excited about what we're doing today and the future of legislative updates and having elected officials participate and join our legislative updates moving forward to hear directly from them the importance of hearing healthcare and hearing professionals. And the other piece is the continued involvement of Listen Carefully ambassadors. I'm really excited over the next 6, 8, 12 months to get more visits into our Listen Carefully ambassadors' offices from elected officials. So, really breaking down that barrier to contact elected officials, getting more elected officials involved in our legislative update and other videos and podcasts that we do on a regular basis, and then continuing to recruit more ambassadors, but to get elected officials into their offices and clinics as well. It's very exciting. What the next 6 to 12 months has in store as it relates to Listen Carefully.
Michael, I can't thank you enough for your enthusiasm. This was the first, I should say, the inaugural Listen Carefully legislative report. This is a segment where Michael is going to be interviewing some Starkey and Listen Carefully team members, but also elected officials when they come visit Starkey, Michael.
Absolutely. Or if they visit an ambassador's office, we can be present and interview there as well. It's really exciting. But above all, it's proud to be part of a team and organization that takes and understands the importance of advocacy and understanding what's happening that impacts our hearing professionals on a daily basis. So to be part of that team, to have helped create a program like Listen Carefully, it's great to be part of the Starkey family that understands first and foremost the importance of the hearing professional.
If you're a hearing care professional watching the Listen Carefully legislative report and you are interested in becoming a Listen Carefully ambassador, please visit listencarefully.org and submit a contact submission. One of our team members will be in touch with you. And until next time, hear better and live better.